Could get awful.
But she does a really good job of picking the spots that she places them in. And I really enjoyed the voice of the painting because of the outrage and snark that the painting, speaks about. He expresses, because he's residing in Annie's ratty little apartment, and this is not what he's used to. He's used to palaces, mansions, and amazing museums. So I'm going to read this from the painting's point of view. And as I've said in the past, I really should have had Jeff do it with his French accent, so you'll just have to bear with me. We stopped, and she opened the front door. Imagine my disappointment when there were no servants to greet her, not even an aged retainer, a very bad omen. She obviously lived alone. I noticed that the mattress rested on planks and bricks. On a packing crate by the messy side of the bed, there were piles of books. Though my vision was distorted badly, each and every tome seemed to be about food. So there's things like that.
It's just not acceptable.
Exactly, exactly.
His voice is the best part of the book.
Yeah.
I know,
Yeah.
I know.
So, of our readers, who's the kind of reader who you think would
Well, I think
most
if you,
this
right.
book appeal to?
First off and foremost, if you like intrigue about the art world, I think this is a book that you would truly enjoy because there's so many things going on around that. And if you enjoy places of character, you won't be disappointed at all because what the author does really, really well is she lets you see the vivid details, especially about the art and the history. And food, both in historical context. So she does a little bit of both. In fact, some of the descriptions of food were just astonishing. It's at its best when she's describing the different places the Watteau has been. I mean, the improbability of love is the name of the painting. So you get to see it in its various homes and its various guises. Also, if you like international intrigue, there's flashbacks to Nazi Germany, and there's a keyhole view of what it's like to paint, which to me was fascinating and beautifully done. It reminded me of the Art Forger in some ways.
I was thinking that because
Yeah.
a lot of book clubs did that last year, and this
Exactly.
seems like
And what was
something that
appealing
would
about that was
appeal
the
to
fact
them.
that you got to see how someone actually created something.
And there's also Siri Hustvedt's The Blazing World, which is another
Yes.
story about the art world. And a female artist who puts herself out there as a woman also does a lot with creating art.
Yes, absolutely.
Girl with the pearl earring and
Yeah,
Right.
that's
things like
another
that.
one.
There's a whole bunch of, in fact, I think that this is a good read-alike for the Tart, as I mentioned earlier, but Susan Vreeland's Girl in Hyacinth Blue is, if you haven't read it, would also be good if you want a story of the survival of art through the ages and World War II, and Dara Horn's The World to Come, which is about the painting as a main character and art's influences on its owners.
Any other final thoughts, Leanne?
I did mention the Donna Tartt, and I have to say, that's a very hard book to compare anything to because it's incredible. It's such a masterpiece. And, the plotting, in some cases, the characterizations of the improbability of love, they're not as deftly or subtly crafted as Tart's. So if you're expecting that kind of experience, you might be a little bit disappointed. However, this is a really tantalizing look into a viciously competitive world of high-stakes art collecting, and it's opulently detailed. Suspensefully plotted, and it's shrewdly witty. Very, very funny things are said in this book. And it's about decadence, it's about crimes, and most importantly, the improbability of love. So I would definitely recommend it to people who want to read something like that about art and love, The Improbability of Love by Hannah Rothschild. And I think it would make a really excellent book discussion because there's so many things in there that you could pull out to speak about.
Sounds meaty.
Yes, so why don't you tell us about your second book, Karen?
Back to immigration again. The next one I'm going to talk about is The Book of Unknown Americans by Cristina Enriquez. And this one comes at immigration from a different perspective from my first one. So it's not about the act of leaving your country and what it takes to get somewhere, but it's about being in a new country. And in this case, that country is right here at home in the US. So there are two families at the center of this book. The Riveras, who have left a very happy life in Mexico. It was happy until their daughter had an accident that caused a brain injury, and they are coming to the US on a sort of a medical visa to help her recover. And then the other family is called the Toros, and they have been in the US for quite a long time. And the Toro's son, Mayor, falls head over heels for Maribel, the Rivera's daughter, as soon as he sees her, when Maribel first arrives in the country. And they all live in an apartment building along with quite a few, well, a large number of other immigrants in an unnamed city. I think it's Wilmington, Delaware. And so this is not just a book about identity and being an immigrant and that, but it's also a coming of age story, and it's about young love, and it's about also about about the ferocity of a parent's love and family bonds and that sort of thing.
So what made it really kind of stand out for you?
This book, it was the characters and the writing style. So the chapters in the main story are told by, the Rivera's story is told by Alma, who's the sort of 40-ish mother, and of the Rivera family. And then the other chapters of the Toro's story are told from Mayor's point of view, and he's a 14-year-old boy. And Enriquez writes equally well from the point of view of the mother and the teenage boy. And then in between, she presents us with this whole cast of really colorful individual characters that just get their own little testimonial chapters sort of stuck in between. They're only about a page or maybe two at the most, but you just get another person's story, somebody else's, how they came here, why they're here, what drew them here. And she all of those voices she gets them just right. You don't know them necessarily because their experiences aren't exactly yours, but you know them. They resonate. They resonate. They speak to you. So that I really enjoyed a lot. If anybody who likes to know what makes people tick, that'll do it for you.
Is there anything else that would be appealing to readers?
Yeah, I think the broad appeal of this is definitely it's a story of young love, and the trials and the tribulations. She gets that teenage angst about love, and the confusion and the wonder and the what do I do and what do I say, and also the kids' refusal to listen to their parents. Because of course the parents don't want them to be together. They're too young. And then the plot is very good. It's very well paced, and it builds to a very tense and dangerous conclusion, which brings the kind of the love story and the immigration story together, and with some tragic results. So it's not a happily ever after book. I wouldn't say it's sort of Romeo and Juliet, star-crossed lovers, everyone dies at the end, but it isn't happily ever after. It's not a Harlequin romance either.
Any final thoughts?
I really like this one. It's a classic American immigrant story, and it's a tale of what it means to live here as a new immigrant in this land of immigrants. That was what I really liked about it. And it reminds me in that sense of Anita Diamond's The Boston Girl, if you've read that, which is a Jewish immigrant story. It also very much reminds me of the sort of the themes of A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, poor family from Ireland in that case. And although the plot line is definitely compelling, I wanted to refer here to what the reviewer and the author Anna Quindlen said about A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. She said, "It's not the sort of book that can be reduced to its plot line. The best that anyone can say is that it is a story about what it means to be human." And I think both of the books that I've talked about today and most of the books on my list were chosen not just because they were about immigrants, but because, as Quindlen also says, they are books in which no matter what our backgrounds, we recognize ourselves. So this is, again, The Book of Unknown Americans by Cristina Enriquez.
Thanks.
And Jeffrey.
Yes, so back to the Booker Prize. I've made a point over the years to actually read all of the Booker winners. Because that's what I did. It's sort of obsessive. I feel like they should give me a patch or a badge.
Like a Boy Scout badge.
Yeah, exactly. And I also find it enjoyable every year to try and read some of the nominees, because those are really equally good. And my second book, which is Fraction of the Whole by Steve Toltz, is a nominee. It was in the running in 2008, and it ended up being shortlisted for the prize, but it lost out to White Tiger, which you might remember from that year. This was actually a debut effort by an Australian author, more Australian, and it has the sort of grand, sweeping sense that almost everything about, whether it's music or film or writing, everything about Australia tends to have that epic sense, but coupled with real quirkiness, I find, which is really enjoyable. This is one of my favorite novels. It's got a picaresque plot line. It's got a lot of really witty, biting black humor, and just towering characters, which I think is one of the main aspects of it. Deliciously witty prose. If you liked Confederacy of Dunces and Ignatius Reilly, who was like one of the greatest characters in literature, you will love this book. He also has another book that he's only had two, so his second book came out last year. It was called Quicksand, and it's a very different storyline, but it has a lot of the same appeal. So if you like one, I think you would definitely enjoy the other.
So besides all those wonderful qualities that you mentioned, is there anything else that the book?
Well, I
puts you in?
think probably what prompted them to nominate it for the prize is a little bit of all of that. The language in particular, again, like the Banville, the language is really great. But probably more, it's the dazzling scope. This is a big book. It's a fast read, but it's just epic in sweep. And I think that's a lot of it. The language is very, almost, I wouldn't say snarky because that has a real negative connotation, but it's just witty and biting. There's so many quotes in it where you want to remember them so that you can use them in a conversation against somebody sometime. And the characters are just really exuberant and intense, and you can't help but just be drawn into this mess of bad decisions that they keep making because it's funny. I mean, the
very
real appeal about it is that it's just hysterically funny.
You've already sold me, but what is it
Okay.
actually about?
So, in general, the plot is about the incredibly dysfunctional Dean family. And Jasper Dean is the son of this appalling man named Martin Dean, who himself is the brother, and he's overshadowed by this brother who is now deceased, named Terry Dean. And Terry is, in Australia, was a sort of, kind of along the lines of Ned Kelly, who was a real character in Australia, sort of Jesse James outlaw character who was a criminal but nonetheless beloved by history and by the population. So the story revolves around the relationship between the two brothers and the son, and the relationship with his father. It's told often by flashback and through different points of view from the different characters. But it's mainly about Jasper and Martin. Martin is just this horrifically dysfunctional person. He's a misanthrope. He does not like the world. He hates everybody, but he desperately wants to make a mark on the world. And so that conflict, I think, really drives the story in a lot of ways, along with driving everybody else nuts, all of his other characters. He embarks on a very early age, and it starts when he's a child, in this little Australian town in the desert. He embarks on a number of quixotic projects, he calls them. And the first one is he finds a way to anonymously set up this suggestion box in his community where people can anonymously put anything they want about anyone in town. A suggestion to do something to make the community better, or just to gripe about your neighbors. And you can imagine where that goes from there.
Sounds like the internet.
Yes. And so then as he gets older, there are other projects that I won't spoil for you, but they just keep getting worse, and they get grander and worse, and it goes on from there. The title of the book actually comes from Ralph Waldo Emerson, who said, "The moment we meet anybody, each becomes a fraction." And so Martin Dean, this is the father, says, "That's my problem. I'm only a quarter of who I should be, maybe even an eighth." And that kind of sums up his life. He's determined to make a mark on the world even though he can't stand it. So that's kind of fun. Jasper sums up his relationship. I have to read this quote to you because it's so perfectly sums up their relationship. His father does die in the end, and you know that right from the beginning, that this is kind of leading up to how they resolve things before their relationship ends. But Jasper, the son, says, "My whole life I'd been pushed beyond rational limits by this man, and I was offended by the notion that I could be so implicated in his lifelong drama and not be present for the grand finale. He might have been his own worst enemy, but he was my worst enemy too. And I'd be damned if I was going to